The world Margaret had painstakingly built over 66 years, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, disintegrated in the span of 3 minutes. A mundane notification on her phone, a voice message meant for someone else, became the harbinger of a chilling truth that would rip through her life like a winter gale. It wasn't just words, it was a blueprint for her undoing, whispered with a casual cruelty that curdled her blood. How do you recover when the person you gave everything to, the very essence of your being, plots your erasure with a heart colder than stone, seeking to cast you aside and claim your life's work as their own? What follows is the story of how a mother, broken by betrayal, found an unyielding strength to reclaim her narrative and remind them that some bonds, once shattered, unleash a force far greater than mere love. The shattering sound of betrayal. Margaret, at 66 years old, found herself caught in a horrifying accidental broadcast. Her own daughter, Grace, unknowingly sent a voice message intended for her husband, Ricardo, straight to Margaret's phone. The mundane chime of the notification gave no hint of the seismic shift it was about to unleash. Pressing play, Margaret heard Grace's voice, a voice she had known since birth, imbued with a shocking coldness that seemed to freeze her very blood in her veins. "Ricardo, I can't take having my mother in this house anymore," Grace declared, the words like sharp daggers. Margaret felt a sickening lurch, a disbelief that warred with the stark reality of the sound. "She's a nuisance. She gets into everything. And on top of that, we're already spending so much money on her." Every syllable chipped away at Margaret's soul, dismantling decades of unconditional love and tireless effort. That bottom seemed to drop out from beneath Margaret's feet as Grace continued, casually discussing her plans as if Margaret were an inanimate object. "I've been looking into some cheap places. I found one that only costs $800 a month." This wasn't just about money, it was about outright dismissal, a complete devaluation of her existence. This was the same daughter for whom Margaret had toiled day and night, cleaning other people's houses, her hands calloused and aching. The same one for whom she had paid for college, selling even her most cherished jewelry to afford the tuition. The very same Grace who had sobbed inconsolably in her arms when Richard first left her at the altar. A crisis that saw Margaret spend her last meager savings to convince him to return. The memories flooded Margaret, each one twisting the knife deeper into her wounded heart. But the audio continued, and the subsequent revelation was even more insidious. A venomous plot unfolding in real time. "Also, I've already checked the house papers. It's in her name, but I found a way to transfer it to our name without her realizing. My cousin Carol, who works at the county clerk's office, is going to help me." Margaret's hands began to tremble uncontrollably, the phone threatening to slip from her grasp. It was more than betrayal now, it was outright theft. Her own daughter was orchestrating a scheme to steal her home, the only possession of true value she had in the world. This house was not just a building, it was a monument to 30 years of grueling labor, built brick by brick with the sweat of her brow, working 12 hours a day. It was the physical embodiment of her entire life's work, and they planned to snatch it from her, without her even knowing. The cruelest blow, however, came at the very end of the message. Margaret heard Grace's chilling, triumphant laugh. "In a month, Mom will be in the home and will own everything. We can finally live in peace without that bitter old woman controlling us." The laughter, light and carefree, was a stark contrast to the profound darkness it contained. If you have ever experienced the most searing, soul-deep betrayal from someone you loved with every fiber of your being, then you might comprehend the desolation that consumed Margaret in that agonizing moment. It was a complete annihilation of trust, a desecration of love, and a calculated plan to discard her like rubbish. But what Grace didn't realize was that her mother, Margaret, was not the naive, easily manipulated old woman she believed her to be. 66 years in this world had taught Margaret a fundamental, often harsh truth. Sometimes, the only way to defend yourself is to meet cunning with cunning, to fight fire with the very same flames aimed at your destruction. Sleep eluded Margaret that night, the chilling laughter and cold words replaying endlessly in her mind. As dawn approached, a new, fierce determination, one she hadn't felt in years, hardened her resolve. She rose, not as a victim, but as a warrior. She donned her most elegant crimson suit, a symbol of her quiet strength, gathered all her essential documents, and left the house, a faint, resolute smile gracing her lips. A plan, meticulously forming in the crucible of her pain, was about to change everything, forever. The roots of sacrifice. To truly grasp the depth of the pain and betrayal Margaret experienced, one must understand the tapestry of her life, woven with threads of sacrifice and unwavering familial devotion. She was raised in a family where love wasn't merely expressed. It was measured by the selfless acts and profound sacrifices made for others. Her mother, a seamstress who worked from 5 in the morning until 10 at night, instilled this value deeply, supporting Margaret and her 3 siblings with relentless effort. Money was always scarce, yet their home was overflowing with love, mutual respect, and an unshakable set of values. Margaret, her mother would say, her fingers deftly guiding the fabric as she taught her daughter to sew. In this life, the only thing that truly matters is family, and for family, you give everything, to the last drop of blood. These words became Margaret's lifelong mantra, shaping every decision she made. At 18, life took an unexpected turn when Margaret found herself pregnant with Grace. The child's father, a fleeting promise, vanished overnight. One evening, he was there, speaking of marriage and a future together. The next morning, he was gone, a ghost. His parents, indifferent to Margaret's plight, slammed the door in her face, their callous words cutting deep. Their son wasn't going to ruin his future for some random girl. It was in this darkest hour that Margaret truly witnessed the steel in her own mother's resolve. "That child is going to have everything we couldn't," her mother declared, embracing Margaret tightly, wiping away her tears. "We'll raise her together so she can grow into a good woman." True to her word, Margaret's mother sold her only 2 gold bracelets, the last vestiges of her own small treasures, to ensure Margaret had everything she needed for the baby. When Grace finally arrived, she was a beacon of light, an angelic presence, with large, luminous eyes and a smile that had the power to illuminate an entire room. Margaret and her mother took turns, a tireless relay of care, while Margaret began cleaning houses at 19, earning a meager $20 a day. Every single cent, however, was dedicated to Grace's future. Margaret vividly remembered the first day she walked Grace to kindergarten. They had no money for the bus, yet Grace's uniform was impeccably ironed, her shoes shining brightly. Amidst the other mothers arriving in sleek, expensive cars, dressed in fashionable attire, Margaret felt small, her patched dress and calloused hands a stark contrast. But when Grace kissed her cheek and whispered, "Thank you, Mom, you're the best in the world," Margaret knew, unequivocally, that every sacrifice was profoundly worth it. The years rolled on, each one a repetition of the same demanding routine. Wake at 4 in the morning, prepare Grace's breakfast, take her to school, then work, cleaning 3 different houses until 6 in the evening. Pick up Grace, help with homework, and tuck her into bed with a comforting story. Weekends were spent doing laundry for extra money, all tirelessly poured into ensuring Grace would have a life far better than her own. Her mother passed away when Grace was 8, but not before extracting a promise from Margaret that would echo through her life. "Margaret, that child is your greatest treasure. Give her an education, give her love, and she will take care of you when you're old. Our family's blood is good. She won't fail you." These words became the bedrock of Margaret's resilience, providing the strength to persevere, even through days so arduous she yearned to surrender. When Grace turned 15, Margaret worked relentlessly for 6 months, taking on extra shifts to orchestrate the lavish party her daughter deserved. $3,500 were poured into that celebration, money painstakingly saved to repair their perpetually leaky roof. Yet, witnessing Grace's radiant face that night, watching her sparkle in her golden dress as she danced, was a priceless reward. "Mom, I don't know how you give me so much when you have almost nothing," Grace had whispered, hugging her. "When I grow up, I'm going to give all this back to you, multiplied by 1,000. This promise, brimming with youthful sincerity, resonated deeply within Margaret. Throughout high school, Grace was an exemplary student, achieving top grades, shining in school plays, and earning accolades from every teacher who foresaw a brilliant future for her. However, maintaining such academic excellence was far from cheap. Books, uniforms, field trips, every expense chipped away at Margaret's already strained finances. She began cleaning a fourth house on Sundays, her sole day off, just to keep pace with the mounting costs. When it came time to enroll Grace in college, the staggering annual tuition of $15,000 loomed large. Margaret, earning a mere $400 a month, did the math. It was an impossible sum. Yet a mother, driven by an unyielding love, performs the impossible for her children. She took out a loan, using her precious home as collateral. She sold the only engagement ring her absent father had given her, and even parted with her mother's revered sewing machine. "My daughter," Margaret told Grace on the day they went to enroll, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't go to college, but you are going to be a professional. You'll have a degree. You'll work in an office with air conditioning, and you'll never have to clean other people's houses like your mother." That day, tears of pure joy streamed down Margaret's face as she watched her daughter sign the enrollment papers for her business. Administration degree, a dream realized through unimaginable sacrifice. For all 4 years of Grace's college education, Margaret continued her tireless work, ensuring every expense was covered. Grace needed funds for books, for projects, for outings with friends, for appropriate attire for presentations. Margaret provided it all, even if it meant subsisting on beans and tortillas for an entire week to conserve every penny. Graduation day was the zenith of Margaret's life. Seeing her daughter stride across the stage in her cap and gown, hearing her name called, and the resounding ovation from the crowd felt like the culmination of every single sacrifice she had made. After the ceremony, Grace embraced her, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, this is as much yours as it is mine. I would never have made it here without you. I promise you that now that I'm a professional, you will never have to suffer again." The promise again was a balm to Margaret's weary heart, a validation of her life's purpose. A year later, Grace met Richard at her new job. Initially, Margaret was overjoyed witnessing her daughter's happiness and blossoming love. Richard appeared to be a decent man, with a stable factory supervisor job, treating Grace with kindness and respect. When he officially asked for Grace's hand in marriage, Margaret wept with emotion, envisioning the stable family life she had always yearned for her daughter, a life she herself could never provide. But the wedding, too, became another monumental financial burden. Grace desired an elegant celebration, echoing the pages of glossy magazines. The venue alone cost $8,000, the dress $2,000, the music $800, and the flowers $600. In total, Margaret spent $10,000 on that single day, money secured through another loan and the sale of her very last pieces of jewelry. The initial years of their marriage were idyllic. Grace and Richard visited every Sunday, sharing dinners, and Grace consistently helped Margaret with household expenses. "Mom, now that I'm working, I want to take care of you the way you took care of me," she would often say, handing Margaret money for groceries. Margaret finally felt that her endless sacrifices had borne fruit, that she had a grateful daughter who truly loved her, a genuine return on her lifetime investment of devotion. The slow creep of deception. Everything began to subtly shift 3 years prior, a quiet erosion that started when Richard lost his job and financial anxiety started to plague the couple. Their requests for money became more frequent, and Margaret, as always, found herself unable to refuse. First, it was $1,000 for monthly expenses, then $2,500 for a down payment on a new car, followed by $3,000 to settle credit card debts. It was after that last $3,000 loan that an almost imperceptible change began to take hold. Initially, Margaret rationalized these small alterations in their behavior, attributing them to the stress of their financial woes. But now, with the chilling voice message ringing in her ears, she understood. It wasn't stress. It was the calculated genesis of a sinister plan to systematically expunge her from their lives. The first significant sign was their abrupt cessation of Sunday visits. "Mom, we're so busy with Richard's new job," Grace would explain over the phone, her voice tinged with what Margaret now recognized as feigned remorse. "You know how it is. We need to show we're responsible." Margaret, ever understanding, accepted the explanation, believing it natural for a young couple to prioritize their career advancements. But then came the escalating excuses for unanswered calls. Morning calls were met with, "Mom, I'm in an important meeting. I'll call you later." Afternoon calls elicited, "Oh, Mom, I'm at the grocery store doing our weekly shopping." By evening it was, "Mom, it's too late. We're having dinner. We'll talk tomorrow." That tomorrow rarely materialized, and when it did, conversations were clipped, lasting barely 5 minutes. Then came the hurtful comments, cunningly disguised as concern. "Mom, Richard says he's noticed you've been very forgetful lately," Grace announced one day during one of their increasingly rare phone calls. "Are you sure you can live alone in that big house? At your age, anything could happen." Margaret laughed nervously, attributing it to overprotective worrying, but the seed of doubt, subtly planted, began to sprout in her mind. One afternoon, pineapple dessert in hand, Richard's favorite, Margaret decided to visit them unannounced. She knocked, heard laughter and voices within, but it took almost 5 minutes for the door to open. "Oh, Mom, what a surprise," Grace greeted her, a forced smile plastered on her face that failed to reach her eyes. "We were just organizing some work papers." Inside, Carol, Grace's cousin from the county clerk's office, sat surrounded by a chaotic scattering of documents on the kitchen table. Upon Margaret's entrance, Carol hastily swept the papers into a folder. "Hello, Aunt Margaret," Carol said, her smile as artificial as Grace's. "I was just helping Grace with some of Richard's health insurance paperwork." But Margaret had caught a fleeting glimpse of her own name on one of the documents before Carol concealed it. "Why do you need papers with my name on them?" Margaret inquired, a genuine curiosity masking a nascent flicker of unease. Grace and Carol exchanged a quick, knowing glance, a silent communication. Margaret then couldn't decipher but now understood with searing clarity. "It's just to update the beneficiaries on the insurance, Mom," Grace smoothly explained. "You know, in case something happens to us, you're our only family." The explanation at the time assuaged Margaret's concerns. However, she later observed that any mention of the topic would cause Grace to swiftly pivot the conversation. "Mom, why don't you tell me about the garden?" Or, "Oh, Mom, did you see the new show that's on Channel 5? Then the deliberate forgetfulness began. Margaret would be invited to lunch, only to arrive at the restaurant and find them absent. "Oh, Mom, we forgot to tell you we had to cancel." They'd apologize later, citing a work emergency for Richard. This frustrating pattern repeated 3 times in 2 months. The 4th time, Margaret found herself sitting alone in that restaurant for an agonizing hour, a profound sense of foolishness washing over her as other families around her shared happy meals. They also began to exclude her from important family events. Margaret learned by chance from her neighbor, Miss Rose, that Grace and Richard had hosted a barbecue for Richard's birthday. "How strange you weren't there, Margaret," Miss Rose remarked. "I saw them buying meat for like 20 people at the supermarket." When Margaret confronted Grace, she was met with a dismissive, "Oh, Mom, it was a very informal thing. We didn't want to bother you." But the ultimate insult, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, was their decision to temporarily move into Margaret's home. "Mom, they're going to paint our apartment, and we need to stay with you for about a month," Grace announced. "Besides, this way we can spend more time together. Don't you think it's perfect?" Margaret, ever hopeful, was initially delighted, believing this would mend the growing rift between them. However, from the moment they arrived, her cherished home was transformed. Richard began to incessantly complain. The TV was too old, the internet too slow, the shower pressure inadequate. "Aunt, this house needs a lot of repairs," he would declare. "At your age, maintaining such a big property must be very difficult." Grace, meanwhile, began to reorganize Margaret's belongings without permission. "Mom, these plates are too old. I'm going to replace them with new ones," she'd announce. "And these clothes in your closet are so out of style. We should just donate them." Slowly, insidiously, Margaret's house ceased to feel like her own. She became a guest, a displaced stranger in the very sanctuary she had built with her life's work. Then came the hushed conversations, abruptly ceasing the moment Margaret entered a room. She would see them whispering in the kitchen, only for them to immediately switch to trivial topics like the weather or news upon her appearance. "What were you talking about?" Margaret would ask. "Nothing important, Mom," Grace would reply. "Just about the house expenses." One night, Margaret overheard Richard speaking quietly on the patio phone. "Yeah, we're already living here. No, she doesn't suspect a thing. Carol says she can have all the papers ready in 2 more weeks." When Margaret stepped outside to inquire, he quickly claimed it was a work project with his boss. They also began subtly controlling her finances. "Mom, let me help you with the electric and water bills," Grace would say, her voice deceptively sweet. "You're too old to be worrying about these things." Initially, Margaret appreciated the gesture, but soon realized Grace was meticulously scrutinizing all her bank statements. "Mom, why do you need so much cash?" Grace would interrogate when Margaret withdrew a modest $200 for her personal expenses. The most painful aspect was overhearing their disparaging comments when they believed Margaret wasn't listening. One afternoon, while Margaret was trimming plants in the garden, she heard Richard tell someone on the phone, "My mother-in-law is getting harder to handle. She's becoming very stubborn with age." Grace's laughter echoed in the background, followed by her addition, "It's true. Lately, she forgets things and gets very difficult when we try to help her." But what truly ripped open Margaret's eyes was when they began making comments about her mental health in front of other people. Her dear friend, Miss Leticia, a companion of many years, came to visit. "Oh, Leticia," Grace lamented dramatically. "My mom has been so confused lately. Yesterday, she wanted to go for a walk at 10 at night because she thought it was morning." This was a blatant lie, a fabrication. Margaret had never done such a thing, yet she watched, a painful knot in her stomach, as Leticia looked at her with a mixture of pity and concern. "Oh, Margaret, it's a good thing you have Grace to take care of you," Leticia said. In that moment, a profound anger welled up in Margaret, intertwined with an immense sadness, as she comprehended that her own daughter was deliberately constructing a false narrative about her mental state. Soon, strange visitors began arriving at her house. Doctors supposedly there to check her blood pressure, social workers wanting to evaluate her living conditions, and even a man who introduced himself as a geriatric care specialist. They all came at Grace's behest, without Margaret's consent or even consultation. During one such evaluation, Margaret, listening intently from the kitchen, lucid and fully aware, heard the doctor tell Grace in the living room, "Ma'am, your mother seems to be physically fine, but I'm going to note in the report that she shows signs of mild, age-related confusion." This man, a stranger, was writing deliberate lies about her mental state, complicit in her daughter's sinister plot. The tension within the house became suffocating, a silent psychological warfare. Each day brought more pressure, more infringements on her autonomy, more hurtful comments cloaked in the guise of care. "Mom, you shouldn't drive anymore," Richard stated one day. "At your age, it's too dangerous." "Mom, it's better if you don't go shopping alone anymore," Grace added. "We can do it for you." Slowly, methodically, they were stripping away her independence, her dignity, her very selfhood. The most agonizing part was their perpetually smiling faces, their assurances that it was all for her own good, that they loved her so much and only wanted to take care of her. The performance was meticulously crafted, but Margaret was starting to see through the veneer. The revelation. A daughter's cruelty unmasked. The moment that irrevocably shattered Margaret's world and fundamentally altered her path arrived that Tuesday afternoon. A simple technological mishap unveiled the cruelest truth she had ever encountered in her 66 years. The day itself had been particularly heavy, thick with a palpable tension. Grace and Richard had departed early, claiming pressing work matters, but Margaret sensed the deception. Their whispered conversations all morning, their quick, artificial smiles whenever she inquired, confirmed her unease. "It's nothing, Mom," Grace had chirped, "just boring stuff about Richard's job." Left alone in the house, Margaret felt a familiar pressure tightening in her chest, a knot that had been steadily growing over the past weeks. Her sanctuary, once a haven of peace, now felt like a gilded cage. Every routine, every personal space, every facet of her life had been subtly altered, contorted to accommodate their needs, and, she now understood, their insidious secret plans. Around 3 in the afternoon, Margaret was brewing chamomile tea, hoping to soothe her frayed nerves, when her phone chimed with a notification. It was a voice message from Grace. At first, Margaret imagined it to be an update. Perhaps they'd be late, or Grace was asking her to prepare a special dinner. How utterly naive she was to still believe her daughter held her in enough regard to share such plans. With an innocent tap, she pressed the play button, completely unaware that the next 3 minutes would meticulously shred her entire life into irreparable pieces. "Richard, I can't take having my mother in this house anymore." Grace's voice began, an edge of exasperation Margaret had never heard directed at her in person. Margaret's heart seized, a cold dread spreading through her. Those words, uttered with such casual contempt, were like sharp daggers piercing her very soul. This was not the sweet daughter who embraced her with "I love you, Mom," every time she left. This was a stranger. "She's a total nuisance, Richard. She gets into everything we do, always asking questions, always there. And on top of that, we're already spending so much money on her. I've been looking into some cheap places. I found one on the outskirts that only costs $800 a month. With what we save, we can finally remodel the kitchen we want so badly and even get new furniture for the living room." Each word was a physical blow, a calculated assault. Her own daughter, the child to whom she had devoted every breath of her life, was discussing her as if she were a worn-out piece of furniture, ripe for disposal. The $800 for the care home was precisely the amount Margaret had been giving them monthly for their personal expenses, money drawn from her modest pension and dwindling savings. But the audio continued, and what followed obliterated any remaining sliver of hope. "Also, I've already checked all the house papers. It's in her name, but Carol already explained how we can transfer it to our name without her realizing. It's going to be about $500 in bribes and fees, but it's worth it. My cousin already has experience with these kinds of arrangements." In that horrifying instant, everything clicked into place. Carol's casual visits with her folders, the hushed conversations that ceased when Margaret appeared, the parade of specialists assessing her house and her mental state. It was all part of a meticulously orchestrated, monstrous plan. They intended to declare her incompetent, to strip her of her legal rights, and to steal her home. Her house, the house she had built with her own hands, brick by painful brick, working 12-hour days for 30 years. The house where she had raised Grace, celebrated birthdays, cried with pride at graduation, dreamed of future grandchildren playing within its walls. That house, valued at approximately $485,000, represented her entire future, her only security, all her worldly assets. "I already spoke with the director of the St. Francis home," Grace's voice continued, a chilling nonchalance in her tone that curdled Margaret's blood. "I explained the situation. I told him that my mother has early-stage dementia and that it's dangerous for her to live alone. He was very understanding. He says they see cases like this all the time. I've already signed all the preliminary admission papers." Margaret's legs buckled, forcing her to sit heavily on the cold kitchen floor. Her own daughter had deliberately lied to a stranger about her mental faculties. She had signed papers, initiating Margaret's involuntary institutionalization, all with the same ease one might plan a vacation. The cruelty was staggering. "The plan is perfect, honey," Grace purred to Richard, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Next Tuesday, we're going to tell her she has a routine medical appointment. We'll take her to the home, check her in, and by the time she realizes what happened, she'll already be inside, and we'll have legal guardianship. Carol says that with the medical reports we got, which say she has mental confusion, it will be very easy to prove she can't make decisions on her own." Those fake medical reports, the ones fabricated with the help of corrupt doctors, those evaluations Margaret had passively endured, believing them to be for her health. It had all been an elaborate charade. A grotesque theatrical production designed to build a false file, to justify stripping away her freedom, her rights, her very identity. Richard's muffled laughter could be heard in the background, along with indistinguishable comments, but his tone of eager approval was painfully clear. The man she had welcomed into her family, whom she had financially supported, whom she had treated like a son, was an active, willing participant in the plot to dismantle her life. "The best part of all," Grace continued, her laughter slicing through Margaret's heart, "is that she'll never suspect a thing. She thinks we're the perfect children who adore her. She still says, "Thank you for taking care of me, honey," when I bring her breakfast in bed. If she only knew that I'm giving her that breakfast to keep her calm while I prepare her funeral in life. In that moment, something within Margaret fractured beyond repair. It transcended mere betrayal. It was the gut-wrenching pain of discovering her daughter harbored such profound hatred. It was the crushing humiliation of realizing that while Margaret knelt in prayer each night, blessing Grace and thanking God for such a wonderful child, Grace was meticulously calculating the days until she could cast her mother aside. With the $485,000 the house is worth, we can pay off all our credit card debts, the car loan, and we'll even have enough left over to go to Europe on vacation like we've always wanted, Grace gleefully outlined. And the best part is we won't have to pretend to love her anymore. No more Sundays pretending we like her horrible food. No more listening to her repetitive stories from when she was young. Each word was another brutal stab. Her food, prepared with such unwavering love every Sunday, hoping for their cherished visits. Her stories, shared from a desire to connect, to impart the beautiful memories and history of their family. Everything Margaret believed was an expression of love and connection was for them an intolerable nuisance to be endured. In a month, Mom will be in the home and will own everything, Grace concluded, her voice laced with finality. We can finally live in peace without that bitter old woman controlling us. Besides, the life insurance she has is in our name, so if something happens to her at the home, God forgive me for saying this, it wouldn't be so bad. Those last words, uttered with such casual malevolence, sent an icy shiver down Margaret's spine. Not content with stealing her house and her freedom, they had coldly calculated that her very death would be financially beneficial. They had reduced their own mother to a mere investment, hoping to profit from both her life and her eventual demise. The message ended with more laughter, interspersed with comments about choosing a restaurant for dinner that night, as if they had just planned a pleasant getaway rather than the total annihilation of the woman who had loved them more than anything else in the world. Margaret remained on her kitchen floor for an indeterminate amount of time, the phone still clutched in her hand. Replaying the message over and over, she desperately hoped she had misheard, that it was a nightmare from which she would soon awaken. But with each replay, the reality solidified, growing more raw, more excruciating, more utterly definitive. That night, food was an impossibility. Sleep was an illusion. All Margaret could do was wander through her house, touching every object, gazing at every photograph, revisiting every memory she had painstakingly built, imagining the day she would lovingly pass it all on to her daughter. Now, she knew it would all be stolen, sold, or carelessly discarded, stripped of any sentimental value it held. But as she drifted through the darkened rooms in the early hours of that morning, something profound began to shift within her. The overwhelming sadness and pain, though still present, slowly began to transmute into something else, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A pure, cold, unyielding determination. Her daughter truly believed her to be a naive old woman, easily manipulated. But Grace had gravely underestimated the woman who had raised her. As dawn broke, Margaret rose with a mental clarity she hadn't possessed in months. She donned her most elegant crimson suit, the one reserved for the most significant occasions. Clutching her purse containing all her crucial documents, she left the house before Grace and Richard stirred. A quiet resolve etched on her face. She had a plan, and they had absolutely no idea what storm was about to break. The dawn of retribution. That morning, Margaret awoke precisely at 5 o'clock, as if her very body intrinsically recognized it as the most critical day of her life. All night, in the crucible of her mind, she had meticulously planned every single move, every word, every intricate detail of what she was about to do. She was no longer the vulnerable Margaret who had allowed her own daughter to manipulate her for months on end. Today, she would unequivocally demonstrate to Grace that she had profoundly underestimated the woman who had brought her into this world and nurtured her. Margaret carefully selected her crimson pantsuit, the very same one she had worn with immense pride to Grace's college graduation. She applied her makeup with deliberate care, styled her hair elegantly, and fastened the pearl earrings her mother had bequeathed to her. She wanted to present herself as the strong, dignified woman she was, not the fragile victim they had so carelessly perceived. Before her departure, she penned a concise note, leaving it conspicuously on the kitchen table. Left early to take care of some personal matters. Will be back in the afternoon. Love, Mom. No further details were necessary, nor did they deserve them. For months, they had made decisions about her life without a shred of consultation. Now it was her turn to act decisively, without offering a single explanation. Her first stop was the bank, where she arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, just as they opened their doors. "Good morning, Miss Baker," greeted Nora, the branch manager who had known Margaret for 15 years. "How can we help you today?" Margaret met her gaze with a firmness that visibly surprised Nora. "Nora, I need to review all the transactions in my account for the last 6 months, and I want to change all my beneficiaries," she stated unequivocally. "I also need you to explain to me if anyone has attempted to access information about my accounts without my explicit authorization." Nora's brow furrowed as she navigated through Margaret's file on the computer. "Miss Baker, I do have several inquiries about your account registered here, made by your daughter, Grace." She presented a letter, purportedly signed by you, authorizing her to review your bank statements to assist you with your finances. Margaret's blood boiled with a fresh surge of indignation. "Nora, I never signed that letter. Can you show me that document?" When the supposed authorization was presented, Margaret immediately recognized the forgery. It bore a superficial resemblance to her signature, but the slant of the handwriting was distinctly not hers. "This is a forgery," she declared, producing her identification for Nora to compare the signatures. "My daughter has been fraudulently accessing my bank information. I need you to immediately cancel any authorization she may have and place a security alert on my account." Nora paled, grasping the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Baker, this is very serious. We will cancel all unauthorized access immediately, and I strongly recommend that you file a fraud report." "That is precisely what I intend to do," Margaret replied, her voice unwavering. "But first, I need to protect my assets. I want to transfer all my funds to a new account that only I can manage, and I want to change the beneficiary of my life insurance." For the next hour, Nora diligently assisted Margaret in securing her financial future. She transferred her $8,750 in savings to a brand new secure account, updated all passwords, and, with a subtle twist of satisfaction, designated a charitable foundation for abandoned seniors as the new beneficiary of her life insurance. Grace would no longer see a single cent of her hard-earned money. Her second destination was the county clerk's office, where Carol, Grace's complicit cousin, worked. Margaret arrived unannounced, a small, discreet recorder nestled securely within her purse. "Good morning, Carol," Margaret greeted her with a disarmingly sweet smile. "I've come to check the status of my property. My daughter told me you had been helping her with some paperwork." Carol immediately stiffened, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "Oh, Aunt Margaret, what are you doing here? Grace didn't tell me you were coming." Her hands trembled nervously as she tried to hastily close some documents scattered across her desk. "Don't worry, Carol," Margaret said, maintaining her casual demeanor. "I just want to better understand this insurance paperwork my daughter is doing. Could you explain exactly what documents you need with my name on them?" Carol's forehead began to glisten with sweat. "Well, Aunt, it's just routine updates for the registry." Her voice cracked, betraying her realization that Margaret knew far more than she let on. "Carol," Margaret said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a firm, unwavering tone. "I know exactly what you and my daughter have been planning. I know about the fake documents. I know about the plan to take my house, and I know you've been helping her forge papers using your position here." Margaret then produced her phone, displaying the audio recording from the previous day. "I have proof of everything." Carol slumped in her chair, her facade crumbling. "Aunt Margaret, I didn't want to do it, but Grace told me that you couldn't take care of yourself anymore, that it was for your own good." "It was for money, Carol." "Don't pretend it was for my own good," Margaret stated firmly. "Now you have two options. Either you help me reverse everything you've done, or I go straight to your boss and show them the evidence that you've been forging official documents." Carol burst into tears. Please, Aunt, I can't lose my job. I have 3 kids to support. Between sobs, she confessed the entire convoluted process. How they had forged Margaret's signature on various documents, how they had created fraudulent medical reports, and their precise plan to use all of it to have Margaret declared incompetent and transfer her property. "All right, Carol," Margaret said once the confession was complete. "You're going to help me fix this, and then you're going to look for another job. But if you help me now, I won't press criminal charges against you." Over the next 2 hours, Carol, under Margaret's watchful eye, meticulously helped invalidate all the fraudulent documents they had created. She also provided Margaret with copies of everything as irrefutable evidence, including the fake medical reports and the property transfer documents they had so carefully prepared. Margaret's third pivotal stop was the office of Attorney Harrison Ford, renowned as the most respected lawyer in the entire city. Attorney Ford, Margaret began, presenting him with the formidable stack of evidence she had meticulously collected. "I need your help to stop a fraud and protect my rights." Attorney Ford, a man of quiet gravitas, reviewed all the documents with an intense professional focus. "Miss Baker, this is a very serious case of family fraud. We have more than enough evidence to press criminal charges, but tell me, what precisely do you wish to achieve?" Margaret's gaze met his, unwavering. "I want justice, attorney," she replied. "But most of all, I want my daughter to learn that actions have consequences. For 66 years, I have been too good, too generous, too understanding. It's time for someone to defend me, even if I have to do it myself." The attorney's lips curved into a slow, admiring smile. "Miss Baker, we are going to prepare a legal strategy that protects all your rights and sends a very clear message about the consequences of trying to defraud a senior citizen." For the next several hours, they worked in tandem, preparing a comprehensive civil lawsuit for fraud, falsification of documents, and attempted illegal appropriation. They also prepared a robust criminal complaint against Grace, Richard, and Carol. The attorney assured Margaret that she had an exceptionally solid case and that it was highly probable she would recover all damages caused. By the end of the afternoon, Margaret returned home, feeling utterly transformed. She was no longer the vulnerable, unsuspecting victim who had left that morning. She was a woman who had seized full control of her life, ready to confront the repercussions of years spent allowing others to abuse her inherent kindness. When Margaret arrived, Grace and Richard were ensconced in the living room, watching television, portraying an air of complete normalcy, as if nothing untoward had transpired. "Hi, Mom," Grace chirped, her voice dripping with that familiar, artificial sweetness Margaret had now learned to recognize with chilling clarity. "How did your errands go?" "Very well, honey," Margaret replied calmly, her tone remarkably even. "I took care of exactly what I needed to." She settled into her favorite armchair, fixing them with an unwavering gaze. "By the way, some people are coming to visit us tomorrow. I hope you're here to receive them." "What people, Mom?" Richard inquired, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Oh, you'll see," Margaret told them, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. "They are people who are going to help us clarify some important things about our family's future." That night, they ate dinner in a tense, unsettling silence. Margaret knew precisely the storm that was about to break the following day, while they remained blissfully unaware of the cataclysm approaching. For the first time in months, Margaret slept soundly, enveloped in the serene peace of knowing that justice, long deferred, was finally on its inevitable way. The unveiling, a daughter's public shame. The next day, precisely at 10 o'clock in the morning, the doorbell chimed, a sound that heralded not a friendly visit, but the arrival of a reckoning. "I'll get it," Margaret announced, rising swiftly before Grace or Richard could even stir. Standing on her porch were Attorney Harrison Ford, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers, and a public notary. "Good morning, Miss Baker," the attorney greeted her, his voice imbued with quiet authority. "We've come to execute the orders we discussed yesterday." Grace and Richard, drawn by the unexpected visitors, rose from the sofa, their faces etched with utter confusion. "Mom, what's going on?" Grace stammered, her voice laced with growing apprehension. "Who are these people?" "Sit down," Margaret commanded, her voice carrying an uncharacteristic weight of authority. a tone they had never heard from her before. "It's time for you to know the truth." Attorney Ford cleared his throat, his gaze unwavering as he addressed Grace and Richard. "Ms. Grace and Mr. Richard, I am here on behalf of Miss Margaret to inform you that we have discovered irrefutable evidence of fraud, falsification of documents, and conspiracy to commit illegal appropriation against her." Grace and Richard's faces turned a ghastly shade of white, all color draining from them. "What are you talking about?" Grace stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "We would never do anything like that." "Grace," Margaret interjected, her voice calm but firm, as she took out her phone. "Do you want me to play for everyone the voice message you accidentally sent me yesterday?" In that agonizing moment, Margaret watched as all the blood drained from her daughter's face, her eyes widening with pure, unadulterated panic. The realization dawned on Grace with brutal force. Her meticulously crafted, perfect plan had been exposed, undone by her own careless negligence. The moment of truth had arrived, stark and unforgiving, and there was no turning back. The silence in Margaret's living room became deafening, thick with unspoken dread. Grace and Richard stood petrified, staring at Margaret as if she were a specter. For months they had reveled in the belief that they held absolute control, that Margaret was merely a helpless old woman, a pliable pawn in their schemes. Now, in the stark light of day, they finally comprehended the profound error of their judgment. They had catastrophically underestimated the woman who had nurtured and raised them. "Attorney Ford," Margaret intoned, her voice unwavering and serene, "please proceed with the presentation of the evidence." The attorney opened his briefcase, extracting a thick, ominous folder brimming with documents. "Ms. Grace and Mr. Richard, we are in possession of irrefutable evidence of the crimes you have perpetrated against Ms. Margaret." He laid the first set of documents on the coffee table. "Let's begin with the forgeries." He presented Grace with the document she had signed at the bank, fraudulently authorizing herself to access Margaret's accounts. "This is her authentic signature," he explained, pointing to Margaret's identification. "And this is the forged signature that you presented at the bank." The differences, when viewed side by side, were glaringly obvious. I don't know what you're talking about," Grace stammered, her voice so fraught with trembling it was undeniably clear she was lying. "Mom asked me to help her with her accounts because she was forgetting to pay the bills." "Grace," Margaret said, a calm she hadn't known she possessed surprising even herself. "Stop lying. There's no escape now." She took out her phone and pressed the play button. Her own daughter's voice, cold and dismissive, filled the silent room. "Richard, I can't take having my mother in this house anymore. She's a total nuisance. She gets into everything we do." Margaret watched Grace's face crumble completely as she listened to her own incriminating words. Richard attempted to maintain a semblance of composure, but his hands visibly shook. Neither of them had fully grasped that the message had been mistakenly sent to Margaret's phone. "I've been looking into some cheap places. I found one that only costs $800 a month." "Turn that off!" Grace shrieked, lunging towards Margaret's phone, but one of the officers immediately intervened, gently but firmly restraining her. "That's private. You have no right to listen to my conversations." "Relax, honey," Margaret told her, a cold, unwavering smile on her lips. "This is just getting started. Sit down and listen to everything you planned for your mother." The audio continued to play, each word a further condemnation. "Carol already explained how we can transfer the house to our name without her realizing. It's going to be about $500 in bribes and fees, but it's worth it." Richard abruptly rose to his feet. "This is a setup," he declared, pointing an accusatory finger at the attorney. "You're manipulating her to accuse us of things we didn't do." Attorney Ford maintained his professional demeanor, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Richard, we haven't even reached the most interesting part yet." He extracted another document from the folder. "This is the complete and signed confession of Carol Rodriguez, cousin of Ms. Grace, who works at the county clerk's office." Margaret's eyes met Grace's, and she witnessed the dawning realization of Carol's betrayal. "In this confession," the attorney continued, "Carol details exactly how you pressured her to forge official documents, how you fabricated fraudulent medical reports, and how you plan to utilize these documents to declare Ms. Margaret mentally incompetent." Carol is a liar, Grace shrieked, desperation lacing her voice. She made all that up to save her own skin. Oh, really, honey? Margaret inquired, pulling out her small, discreet recorder. Because I also have the complete conversation I had with Carol yesterday in her office recorded. She pressed play, and Carol's tearful, detailed confession filled the room. Grace told me that you couldn't take care of yourself anymore. She showed me how to forge your signature. She promised me she would pay me $2,000 once she had the house. Richard sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. This is a nightmare, he mumbled. Everything got out of control. No, Richard, Margaret stated firmly, her voice imbued with unshakable conviction. This is justice. What was a nightmare was living in my own house, feeling like a prisoner, listening to you talk about me as if I were a nuisance, watching you plan to steal everything I've worked for in my life. Attorney Ford meticulously continued with the presentation of evidence. We also have the fraudulent medical reports that you commissioned. He displayed documents where corrupt doctors had falsely claimed Margaret suffered from senile dementia and was incapable of making her own decisions. Miss Margaret voluntarily underwent a full psychological evaluation yesterday, conducted by Dr. Raymond Morales, a highly respected geriatric specialist at the General Hospital. He presented the official report. The results unequivocally show that Ms. Margaret is in perfect mental condition, with a clarity and reasoning ability superior to the average for her age. This irrefutably proves that all the previous reports were fabricated. Grace began to weep, but these were not tears of remorse, rather tears of sheer desperation as her meticulously constructed plan unraveled before her eyes. Mom, please, she pleaded, her voice broken. We just wanted to take care of you. We thought it would be better for you to be in a place where they would attend to you professionally. Take care of me? Margaret asked, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. By stealing my house, by lying about my mental health, by planning to institutionalize me against my will? Margaret stood and walked towards her daughter. Honey, in that message, you also said you hoped I would die soon so you could collect my life insurance. I never said that, Grace screamed, but Margaret simply replayed that specific, damning portion of the audio. Besides, the life insurance she has is in our name, so if something happens to her at the home, God forgive me for saying this, it wouldn't be so bad. The silence that followed was devastating, weighty with the horror of Grace's words. Even the police officers exchanged looks of undisguised disgust, hearing a daughter speak of her mother's death as a mere financial opportunity. But there's more, the attorney stated, producing yet another folder. We also discovered that for the last 6 months, Miss Grace has been withdrawing money from her mother's accounts without authorization using fraudulently obtained information. He presented the bank statements, highlighting numerous withdrawals ranging from $500 to $1,500, all executed by Grace. In total, they have stolen $8,750 from Miss Margaret's accounts. That money was for house expenses, Richard protested, his voice laced with indignation. We were paying for food and utilities. That's a lie, Margaret countered sharply. I was still paying all my house bills with my pension. That money you stole was for your personal whims. I saw you buying expensive clothes, going to fancy restaurants, while you told me we had to save because times were tough. The attorney systematically continued to expose every incriminating detail of their criminal scheme. We also have evidence that you contacted the director of the St. Francis home and paid a $1,200 registration fee to secure a spot for Ms. Margaret, all without her knowledge or consent. He displayed the payment receipt and the admission documents they had secretly signed. You planned to take her this coming Tuesday, telling her it was a routine medical appointment. It was for your own good, Mom? Grace insisted desperately, still clutching at straws. You were getting so forgetful. Sometimes you got confused. Enough with the lies. Margaret finally exploded, her composure momentarily fracturing. I have never been confused. You invented those stories to justify your plan. I still manage my own finances, cook my own food, take care of my own house, and even help you financially when you ask me. She addressed Grace directly, looking her squarely in the eye. You know what hurts the most, honey? It's not that you wanted to steal my house. It's not that you plan to institutionalize me against my will. What hurts the most is that for all these months, while I hugged you and told you how much I loved you, you were calculating how much money you were going to make from my death." Grace completely broke down, collapsing into hysterical sobs. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. We were desperate for money. We had so many debts. We didn't know what to do." "Desperation doesn't justify betrayal," Margaret told her firmly. "If you needed money, you could have asked me honestly. My entire life I have given you everything I have, but instead of trusting my love, you decided to steal from me and destroy me." The police officer approached, handcuffs dangling in his hand. "Miss Baker, do you wish to proceed with the arrests?" Margaret looked at her daughter, who, well,